Welcome back. Here's yet another video in this unending set of videos on personal jurisdiction. I'm your host, Professor Nathenson, and hopefully I'll getting punchy. Lots of videos. All right. This next video is about state court jurisdiction in personam. Now, in personam means jurisdiction over the person. Persons could be people, or they could be entities, such as LLCs, corporations, and so on. Now, two things we're going to talk about. The first one is about the overall analysis, and the second is about long arms. So first, the overall analysis. The two stoplight approach. What I mean by two stoplights is the long arm statute must first be analyzed, and second, you must analyze 14th Amendment due process. You can't analyze just one or the other, analyze both. Even if you think in an essay that one part of the analysis is dispositive, please do both parts of the analysis, okay? Analyze all issues raised by the call of the question. All right? So due process we're going to analyze in other videos, but right now I want to talk briefly about long-arm statutes. A long-arm statute is a statute that authorizes a state court to exercise jurisdiction over defendants, okay? The reason state legislatures create long-arm statutes is because the 14th Amendment does not, on its own terms, authorize a state court to exercise jurisdiction. Instead, the 14th Amendment limits the exercise of jurisdiction by a state court. Remember, 14th Amendment, no state shall deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. It's a limitation, not an authorization. In contrast, long-arm statutes provide that authorization. And they fall into a whole bunch of categories. One type is an enumerated long-arm statute, like New York CPLR Section 302, or the Florida long-arm statute, Section 48.193. An enumerated long-arm statute is one that enumerates, lists a variety of bases when there's going to be a jurisdiction authorized in the courts of that state. Enumerated statutes oftentimes are narrower in scope than what might otherwise be authorized by the Due Process Clause. Something important to note about enumerated long-arm statutes is you've got to construe and apply the language of the long-arm statute. And cases may be important here as well in fleshing out meaning of long-arm statutes. So, for example, the New York long-arm statute 302 subsection 2 allows PJ when a tortious act is committed within the state. Okay? Well, what does it mean for a tortious act to be committed within the state? We read the Bensusan case, right? Where a website was run and operated out of state by an out-of-state defendant. And the court said the act was not within the state, and therefore there was no tortious act within the state. On the other hand, the state court in Gray v. American Radiator read almost identical language to say that a tortious act is not complete until the injury occurs, and looked not to the place of the tortious act, but of the tortious injury. And the court equated tortious injury with tortious act, and held that the defendant's act in Ohio caused an injury in the form state of Illinois, and since the injury was felt in Illinois, that's where the tort was complete, and therefore the tortious act occurred not within Ohio, where a component part was manufactured, but instead where the plaintiff resided in the state of Illinois. That tells us when you have a long-arm statute, you got to engage in some statutory construction, you got to think about alternative interpretations, and possibly argue in the alternative. If I give you an enumerated long-arm statute, you're going to have more work to do in your analysis, okay? Now, in contrast, an unenumerated long-arm statute, here's the California one, is oftentimes coextensive with the scope of due process under the 14th Amendment. So here's the California model. A court of the state may exercise jurisdiction on any basis not inconsistent with the Constitution of this state, California, and the U.S. Constitution. Now, in this class, we're not going to be talking about state constitutions, right? But to analyze this one, you have to make sure the jurisdiction was okay under the California Constitution and also okay under the U.S. Constitution, namely the 14th Amendment. What that means for purposes of this class is if you have an unenumerated statute, then your analysis for the long arm is going to be very brief. You might say something like this. This statute says PJ is okay to the full extent of the U.S. Constitution. That means so long as the Constitution doesn't prohibit jurisdiction, then the long-arm statute would grant jurisdiction. And then you'd have to figure out whether the Constitution would limit jurisdiction, and if not, then the long-arm would grant that jurisdiction. Very, very simple analysis as compared to an enumerated long-arm statute. Now, there's other kinds of statutes which we've noted in passing in class, such as business registration statutes or motorist statutes, like the one at issue in Hess versus Pulaski. Those are examples of specialized long-arm statutes. So we talk about enumerated laundry lists. That's like the Florida or Munich model. Above that, unenumerated. That's the California model that we just discussed. Enumerated specialized. That would be like the business registration statute or the motorist statute we discussed. And then in passing, finally, I'll note very briefly that for some types of jurisdiction, there's authority that the court does have inherent authority, inherent power to exercise jurisdiction in scenarios involving transient jurisdiction, tag jurisdiction. Okay, a final reminder on long arms is a long arm is a necessary part of the analysis when you're doing state court in personam jurisdiction. A long arm must be satisfied for the B jurisdiction. Long arm is necessary, but by itself not sufficient. Second, you would also have to analyze the 14th Amendment due process clause. A final thing, an implication of what I just said is both have to be satisfied. So if your conclusion is the long arm is satisfied, but due process would be violated, no jurisdiction, because here the long arm would exceed the scope of due process. And if you flip it reverse, you get the same result. Say the long arm is not satisfied, but due process would not prevent the jurisdiction. There's still no jurisdiction. Both must be satisfied. All right, thank you. That's the end of this video, and more videos are coming up in a moment. Thank you.